Hey everybody, this is Mr. Moppet coming at you with another APUSH video. This is topic 7.13, World War II military. Now, previously we've been taking a look at World War II from a home front perspective, taking a look at how the war affected various groups of Americans, the power of the governments, things like that. And of course, when we do talk about World War II, it is important to be able to compare and contrast those two world wars, both on the home front and also on the front lines. And in this video, we're going to be taking a look at how the war is going to be fought in Europe. The next video, we'll be taking a look at the fight in the Pacific. Now, note, we're going to be basically taking a look at the war once the United States officially enters into the conflict following the attack by the Japanese on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. Now, that being said, prior to America's official entry in the war, the Axis powers had been doing very, very well. As you can see here in this map of Europe, if you take a look at the areas in black, you can see all the different directions that the Axis powers of Germany and Italy had been successful in invading and occupying in the first 2 years of the war. Pretty much all of Europe is going to be, continental Europe will be captured, including Germany's arch rival France in 1940. And even though Germany will make this war a two-front war following the invasion of the Soviet Union in early 1941, once again, as you see here in these black arrows, you can see that the Germans are doing a very good job of pushing Soviet forces further and further east. Of course, the British are getting continuously bombed. It was going to be known as the Battle of Britain. So as we get into, late 1941, this is, Germany looking like it's pretty much unstoppable in the war. But we're now going to take a look at how that's going to start to change. As we do get into 1942, we're going to be seeing German forces, as we said, push the Soviets further and further back into some of the more eastern interior major cities like Leningrad, Moscow, and Stalingrad. And Stalingrad is going to be a key turning point of this war. Stalingrad is going to be taking several months to fight, and boy, will that fighting be vicious, as pictured right here. This is going to be urban combat, street by street, block by block, carnage unlike anywhere else in the history of warfare, really. This is going to be the deadliest battle and the deadliest war in human history. Hundreds of thousands of people will be casualties. And note, as this battle wears on, as Russian winter becomes more of a part of this fight, as the German supply lines get more and more strung out, German morale will start to dip, and Soviet forces will be able to hold on and secure victory at Stalingrad. And when the Soviets do hold on at Stalingrad, that is going to be significant, because what that's going to do is mark a shift in the tide of the war. Take a look at these red arrows in the eastern side of the map here. Following the loss for the Nazis at Stalingrad, you're going to see Soviet forces beginning to push west. No further will the Nazis be able to continue to push eastward. Now the Soviets will be on the offensive. Now they're going to be spending the next couple of years pushing westward, and Germany will be in slow retreat in Eastern Europe for the remainder of the conflict. Now, as the Soviets are starting to score some victories in the east, of course, there's also going to be some significant wins on the high seas for the Allies. In the Battle of the Atlantic, the North Atlantic, we're going to be seeing American ships being able to take out German subs, to be able to secure those supply lines, much needed supply lines coming from the United States to our friends in Western Europe. Now, there's going to be a number of different strategies that the Allies are going to be using to secure victory. And part of that strategy is going to be the desire to dominate the skies and to use aerial warfare to win this conflict. Now, of course, aerial warfare dates back to World War I, but in World War I, it was going to be far more rudimentary than what we see here in this Second World War. The United States is going to be using various types of bombing strategies to achieve their goals. One of those types of bombing strategies is what's going to be known as strategic bombing. If you take a look at this map up here, this is going to be an aerial shot of the city of Hamburg in northern Germany. And it kind of gives you a little bit of a sense of, what strategic bombing is all about. Because as the name implies, it's not just mass detonation of weapons, of bombs, but rather a more surgical attitude towards trying to find specific critical targets that the enemy uses and eliminating those. Things like steel mills, munitions factories, bridges, shipyards, things like that the enemy is going to be using to help with the war effort. You specifically target those things, blow them up, and that's going to, aid in the advantage of trying to win the conflict. Now, note, strategic bombing is effective in kind of slowing down the war production of the enemy, but it is going to be a slow process, because what strategic bombing doesn't necessarily do, or at least doesn't do very quickly, it doesn't really demoralize the enemy in a very profound way, at least for a while. And that's why you're also going to see another type of bombing strategy known as saturation strategy. Saturation bombing. Saturation bombing is the idea of dropping mass amount of tonnage on a particular urban target. The idea being is that if you just, devastate a particular urban area, it will have such an effect on the morale of the community that it will push for the enemy to surrender more quickly. And that is going to be important, because part of what the Allies are going to be demanding is what's going to be known as unconditional surrender. The Allies are going to be telling each other that they will continue to fight until the enemy has completely surrendered. So in other words, this is not going to end in a negotiated peace. There's not going to be a conclusion of this war that, for example, we'll see Hitler stay in power of Germany and him just surrender all the gains acquired during the war. No, that is not going to happen. To use a wrestling metaphor, the Allies are not going to be trying to win via points, but rather we're going to try to win via a pin. We're going to keep wrestling until we pin the enemy down once and for all. And saturation bombing can aid with that. Now, note, both these strategies have pros and cons. Once again, the strategic bombing is good in the sense that it is more humane. You're not really hitting civilians all that much. But it is a slower process to be able to achieve what you want. In saturation bombing, it's much more effective in terms of trying to get the enemy to surrender quickly, but there are all sorts of ethical dilemmas with this, because now you're talking about most of these casualties being civilians. You're not really taking into account or respecting, cultural sites, historical sites, things that, you would hope would survive a war, hopefully, or at least not just needlessly be destroyed. Now, the Allies' attitude of trying to win this, in many respects, is taking a page from General Sherman from the Civil War with this total war strategy. The idea being, and I know this kind of sounds twisted, but, with the amount of death and destruction that you can inflict on the enemy in a very short amount of time, the argument is that if it's so intense, then that will hasten the surrender of the enemy. And if that surrender is hastened, then arguably it will save more lives in the long term. So that's, these are going to be some of the calculations that the Allies are going to be making to try to secure victory in the war. Now, note, even though we call this the European theater, there's also an important part of North Africa playing a role here. Now, if we take a look at this map of Europe once again, you actually go south, you're going to hit Africa. And note, by the time we get to America's entry in the war, almost all of North Africa had been conquered by the Axis powers, especially from Morocco to Western Egypt, the only holdout being here by the Brits in Eastern Egypt. Once the United States lands and will begin to push eastward from Morocco, we're going to be seeing German forces led by Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, kind of move into retreat, moving towards the east. We're going to be seeing British forces inflict a crushing defeat on Nazi forces at the Battle of El Alamein. And El Alamein in Egypt is going to be, just like Stalingrad, one of the big turning point battles in the war, because once El Alamein is secured, as you can see here in these red arrows, the Americans coming from the west, the Brits coming from the east, we're just squishing the Axis powers out of North Africa and securing that part of territory in the war. So in fact, the beginning of the European Allied victory really is going to be taking place in North Africa. Now, with North Africa secured, the next question that the Allies are going to be pondering is, well, where do we go into Europe? And as far as Winston Churchill was concerned, he believed that the Allies should be attacking what he dubs the soft underbelly of Europe, and that would be Italy. And so we'll be seeing, as we get into 1943, Allied forces leaving North Africa, heading first to the island of Sicily, and then to the bottom of the Italian peninsula. This is going to mark a slow slog of moving slowly up the peninsula, up the Apennine Mountains, British and American forces, taking on the Italians, battle after battle, like Monte Cassino and many others, slowly over several months, making their way to Rome. Once the Allies are able to secure Rome, Mussolini is going to be kicked out of power. Now note, Mussolini is not going to initially be captured by the Allies at this point. He'll actually run back and be protected by Hitler. And even though the Italian government will surrender the Allies, German forces will reinforce northern Italy. And so for the last year or so of the war, Allied forces will be fighting German forces in northern Italy to try to liberate that peninsula. And as success is being made in Italy, there's going to be even more of a push by Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union to add another front to the war. Stalin had believed that the Soviets had done most of the heavy lifting in the conflict so far, and this is going to lead to the push of a Western front over here in France. And as you can see here, right here on this peninsula of Normandy, we're going to be seeing the landing at D-Day. D-Day is going to be the largest amphibious assault in all of human history. We are going to be seeing hundreds and hundreds of Allied ships carrying hundreds of thousands of soldiers eventually to the coast of Normandy to begin to push the Germans back in France. And now you've got a situation with that successful landing. You now have a situation where Germany is now having to fight in northern Italy. It's surrendering land in Eastern Europe. It's now retreating in Western Europe. Hitler's having to fight pretty much on all sides, and now the tide has certainly turned. Take a look at all these red arrows. Allies moving north from Italy, pushing west from the Soviet Union, pushing east from France. And as we get into the end of 1944, Germany has pretty much surrendered all of its gains from the war up to this point, and now it's just Germany proper. As we get into early 1945, we're going to be seeing the Germans attempt a counterattack on the German-Belgian border known as the Battle of the Bulge, but that success is just going to be very temporary, very short-lived. As we get into 1945, the Germans will begin to surrender even more territory in Germany itself. As we get into the spring of 1945, only central Germany remains uncaptured, and Berlin itself is beginning to be invaded by the Soviets. As the Soviets enter Berlin, Hitler is going to give up on his dream of a 1,000-year Reich and will commit suicide on April 30th, 1945, with then the German government surrendering about a week later. Now, and note, that date of surrender is going to be known as VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. Now, once the Axis powers in Europe, Germany specifically, surrenders, this is now going to bring to a close 6 years of intensive fighting. But note, as the official war is ending in Europe, we are now starting to see Allied forces come to realize the truth of what had been kind of rumored and had been some degree of conjecture, anecdotes, etc., about this thing that we're going to come to call the Holocaust. Allied forces are going to begin to liberate death camps such as Auschwitz and Dachau and Bergen-Belsen and others, and see the ferocious atrocities that the Nazis had committed, the war crimes, the genocide that is going to be another horrific aspect of this conflict. So understand that, the European theater will be responsible for millions upon millions of deaths, but by spring of 1945, Allied victory will be secured. Next time, we're going to be taking a look at how the Allies will secure victory in the Pacific. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.